where to start. 'Cause every time you smile, I feel tremors in my heart. I have a one concern. How can I be with you till my day comes? Here's what I'm gonna do. Be sitting up in my room, in my bed, thinking about you. I must confess, I'm a mess for you. Be sitting up in my room, in my bed, thinking about you. I'm just a mess with a thing for you. Pray that you'll invest in my happiness. All it takes is just one simple call from you. Turn my heart around if I'm making ground. Pretty baby, please tell me if I'm getting you. Tell me what is up. You see, I need to know. Tell me if I'm far, if I'm getting close. I have but one concern, and the one concern is you. Till I'm with you, here's what I'm gonna do. Sitting up in my room, in my bed, thinking about you. Yes, confess, I'm a mess for you. Be sitting up in my room, in my bed, baby, thinking about you. Just a mess with a thing for you. Oh, yeah. How can one be down? Tell me where to start. 'Cause every time you smile, I feel tremors in my heart. I have one concern. How can I get with you till my day comes? Here's what I'm gonna do. Be sitting up in my room, gonna do. I must confess, I'm a mess for you. Be sitting up in my room, baby, thinking about you. I'm just a mess with a thing. You know I pray that you'll invest in my happiness. Turn around, I must come making my ground. Tell me what is it I need to know. Tell me if I'm fine. I'm just a mess with a clue. Baby, I must confess, I'm a mess for you. Be sitting up in my room, thinking about you. I'm just a mess with a thing. I pray that you'll invest in my happiness. I turn my heart around, I must come making my ground. Tell me what is it I need to know. Tell me if I'm far. I'm just a mess, I'm getting close. Sitting up in my room, I must confess, I'm a mess for you, boy.
Okay. Make sure this works. Hi, everyone. That was some great music. My name is Elizabeth DeMayo. I'm the Associate Books Editor at Tin House, and I am here to welcome you to the 2020 Tin House Summer Workshop at Home Reading Series. For those not familiar with the conference, over the course of last week and this one, over 200 writers are meeting together for a week of workshops, readings, craft lectures, and community. Oh, hi, Kristen. Hey, I'm seeing the chats. And community building. You can find a full list of public events at tinhouse.com/workshop or by following the hashtag #THWW, and you can buy all the faculty's books at bookshop.org. For those watching on YouTube, we posted all of those links in the bio right below. So I'll be introducing everyone reading, and I'm keeping these bios relatively short to really make time for the readings. but I'll just quickly begin by saying how thrilled I am to be introducing these writers and by giving a big thank you as well to the ASL interpreters who are here with us, Rory and Mac. Okay. So our first reader tonight is going to be Jonathan Hill. In Jonathan Hill's graphic novel, Wild Weather, Storms, Meteorology, and Climate, there's a kind of visual magic on the page. Before our eyes, water evaporates and wind speeds up to illustrate its different effects. Of course, graphic novelists know that this is anything but magic. The success of each page represents the meticulousness, care, and creativity that Jonathan and co-creator M.K. Reed brought to their work. I've had the chance to look at more pieces of Jonathan's, and these qualities are evident in all that he does as a cartoonist and illustrator. One of the things I love too is how willing he is to share his artistic process with others, which is evident even on his website, where he talks about the making of Wild Weather and offers a step-by-step slideshow that shows the finished page coming to life. As I'm sure his students know, this willingness to share, to be so open about one's own process, is often one of the things that makes an artist a fantastic educator. Jonathan is an associate professor in the illustration department at the Pacific Northwest College of Art, taught comics and illustration classes for youth programs at the Oregon College of Art and Craft from 2010 to 2018, and was writer in residence through Literary Arts Writers in the Schools program from 2012 to 2016. The book I described is just one of 4 books he's published. His graphic novel, Americus, was published by First Second Books in fall 2011, and Wild Weather was published by First Second in 2019. Odessa will be published this coming November by Oni Press, and True Tales of a 7th Grade Lizard Boy will be published in 2022 by Walker Books. Jonathan currently lives in Portland, and I'm so glad to have him here with us virtually. Jonathan, welcome.
Hello, thanks for that intro. So most of the books that Elizabeth talked about, most of my stuff is for youth publishing, but I'm actually going to read, I get to do, I guess, grown-up work. I've done some work for The Believer, some short comics for The Believer, and it's kind of nice to do something, that's not youth related. So I'm going to be sharing a piece that I did for The Believer a couple of years ago. And let me see if I can get this, make sure that this works. So, all right, questions by Jonathan Hill, which is me. Oops. When most people see my name, they probably think I'm white. If they see me in person, they might ask, "Where are you from?" And when I answer them, they might keep asking questions. No, like, where were you born? No, where's your family from? You know what I mean. Where's your other family from? I know what they mean. But I was born in America. I was raised as an American. If you saw my whole name, it might give you a better picture of my heritage. Like my name, I'm an American, but I also have Vietnamese buried inside. But the Vietnamese is what people see. As a kid, I didn't realize I was different from anyone else until someone pointed it out to me. Hey, you gook. Go back to China. Throughout high school and college, if I referenced my Asianness at all, it was often for a joke, and it was often at the expense of my heritage. Look at that tiny dog. That's what my family calls an appetizer. As I've gotten older, I find myself asking new questions. Why do I draw only white people? What does it mean to be Vietnamese American? My mother and uncle fled Vietnam as refugees after the war. Growing up, I heard stories from my mother of their experiences in Vietnam, escaping and trying to make a life in America. This was one of my favorite dishes as a child. Often, these were stories full of suffering and hardship. We wouldn't get to eat it often because we can never afford to make it. But there was always something stopping me from truly understanding. Was it that I was too young to understand? Hey Mom, do we still have any leftover spaghetti? I don't know that I like this. Yeah, me neither. Or maybe it is simply because children never listen to their parents. In an attempt to connect more with that part of me, I've been reading a lot of works by Vietnamese artists. All of these stories mirror my own family's history in some way. But there was also guilt and shame that came with this understanding. Why did it take other people's stories to understand my family's struggles? We were so poor, some days I wouldn't even eat. I would give your aunts and uncle the rice that was meant for me. Is that a fault of my selfishness? Or is it more a testament to the power of art and its ability to connect us to the larger world? I felt closer to my family and its history, but their experience wasn't mine. It still didn't answer what being Vietnamese meant to me. This part of me that the world sees, this part of me that defines me for so many people, this part of me that is so distant and so close at the same time. All I can do is continue to try to reconcile these two different parts of me. Maybe I will never be able to find the answer to the question of what being Vietnamese means to me. Or maybe the answer has been with me my whole life. Hi, Mom. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. That is a really incredible piece. Our next reader is going to be Jen Shapland. In 2017, I had the pleasure of interviewing Jen for a literary magazine, and the last question I asked her was what she was working on. I'm revising a book about Carson McCullers, she told me. Oh wow, I thought, I have to read that. Since that interview, it's been a total pleasure at Tin House to see that book come to life. Published in hardcover this past February, my autobiography of Carson McCullers is an astounding work of nonfiction. R.O. Kwon says it's a biography that's also a memoir, a story of obsession and longing, and I think that's exactly right. Looks like this. In these pages, Jen comes across the love letters of Carson McCullers and Anne-Marie Cleric Schwarzenbach and can't stop thinking about them. They're the entry point to a book of keen examination, not just of the letters, but of Carson's writing, her therapy transcripts, the places she's lived. It's a book about loneliness, intimacy, self-awareness, queerness, and memory, as well as form and structure, the ways we tell stories, the reasons we want to tell them. It is so human and smart and vulnerable, or to use Carmen Maria Machado's words, gorgeous, symphonic, tender, and brilliant. You could also say what Maggie Nelson says, lucid, distilled, and honest. As a huge fan of Jen's writing, I'll add that this praise describes much of what she does on the page. Work of hers has been published in O, the Oprah Magazine, the Paris Review Daily, Tin House, and elsewhere. Recently, she had a really great short essay called Unitard in Guernica that I'd encourage everyone to check out. Her essay Finders Keepers won a 27 Pushcart Prize, and she was awarded the 2019 Rabkin Foundation Award for Art Journalism. She currently lives in New Mexico, and I am beyond excited to hear her read this evening and to see what she does next. Jen, welcome.
Wow, thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was really awesome. It's so awesome that you and I worked together a long time ago and then got to work together again on this book. And Elizabeth helped with some editing and fact checking. So that's so awesome. So yeah, I'm here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I'll just go ahead and acknowledge this is unceded Tewa land. I always want to mention that. And so I'm going to read to you actually from sort of the middle of this book tonight. Before I do that, I did want to say also that I was at the Tin House workshop in 2014, and I think again in 2015 or maybe 2016, I can't remember. But so I was part of this as a participant, and that just makes it really cool to come back as a reader, even though we're not technically back. So I'm going to read to you from kind of in the middle of the book because I feel like you guys will be able to follow what's going on. If you don't know who Carson McCullers is, since you're at your computer, just go ahead and Google her while I read. And the only other thing you need to know is that, yeah, I got obsessed with this person, this writer, and kind of began researching her life and followed her to a number of different places, her childhood home, her archives, and to Yaddo, which is a place that she spent a number of months working on her novels. Okay. The Hunt. In the fall of 2016, recently arrived in Santa Fe and grading hundreds of student papers each week for a terrible online gig, I unexpectedly received an invitation off the waitlist to work on my McCullers project for 5 weeks at Yaddo. They wanted me to come the following week and they would pay for my plane ticket. I interpreted this as a miracle. Yaddo was a dream of mine since I first started writing. A goal for inhabiting the places that were most important to Carson. On my way to Vermont the previous year, I had gone out of my way to stop at Yaddo, driving only as far as the sign that reads, "Private area beyond here," whereupon I turned around, rebuffed. Yaddo is a posh writers and artists colony in Saratoga Springs, New York, about 2 hours from the city that has welcomed novelists, poets, composers, and visual artists since the 1920s. It was a long trip to New York from my corner of the Southwest, a dark train ride to Albuquerque for the red eye to JFK, and by the following morning, I was falling in and out of sleep on another train up the Hudson, leaves beginning to change along its banks. As a taxi drove me for the second time in my life through Yaddo's gates, this time with permission to proceed past the 2 lakes and up the hill to the dark mansion, the driver, smirking in the rear view, wanted to know if they offered turn-down service for the artists. I told her I didn't think so, but I could see why she might. My first night, late to dinner after falling asleep the second I arrived at my cabin, I took the empty seat beside a poet, a woman who kindly talked me through the procedures of a long and disorienting meal. She soon became one of my real friends. As is customary, a new arrival barely has a chance to eat dinner the first night. At the sight of an unfamiliar artist, the deeply isolated group of 15 pounces and demands a detailed account of the stranger's life and work. Or at least, this was the way of things during the late fall I spent in residence. I relayed the details of my project to the poet, keenly aware that every other person at the table was listening through their own conversations. I told her that I was writing about Carson McCullers and her relationships with women, and she said, "Oh, so she was and trailed off. A what? A lesbian? Was she?" After dinner, blitzed out on roasted squash and bread pudding and homemade rum raisin ice cream, I walked back to my cabin in the tall pines and paged through books on Yaddo and its history. I found myself scrutinizing the face of one woman in particular, Elizabeth Ames. Elizabeth was the director of Yaddo for nearly 60 years. Carson, age 24, went to meet her after exchanging letters. Marjorie Peabody Waite, Elizabeth's sister, had set up the meeting after encountering Carson in Columbus. Waite immediately wrote to her sister, the sole force behind bringing artists and writers to Yaddo, asking her to please meet this shy, sweet girl from Columbus who wants so badly to work at Yaddo, but who wouldn't dream of asking anyone to let her come. They were to meet in Elizabeth's hotel room. But when she arrived, Carson was so paralyzed with nerves that she had lost her voice and couldn't face her. She sat in the lobby crying. Eventually, Elizabeth came down, scanned the lobby, and found Carson without ever having seen her before. She brought the unspeaking young woman up to her room and fed her tea, and eventually Carson came back to life. I imagine their first encounter like the department store scene in the movie Carol, where Carol holds all the cards and young Therese can barely talk. Sitting up in my endless white bed, studying the books for photos of Elizabeth, I realized with a start that I was looking for clues. I was a sleuth. I was a huntress. I was hunting lesbians. Googling. Struggling to make headway on the project while feeling myself invalidated, I devoured book after book from Yaddo's library of titles authored by former writers in residence. I spent hours in this room reading and learning who all had visited and what they had written here. No one else ever came in, so I was free to read and sit out of the rain and cry at my leisure. I devoured Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones in one sitting. Goldberg's book struck a chord in me. Writing is a physical act, she insists, a movement of the body. I finished the book and reread the author's bio on the back cover, then began to Google. Within a minute, I was typing Natalie Goldberg lesbian into the search bar. I cannot tell you the number of times I have typed this search with different women's names. I learned that yes, indeed, Goldberg has had a woman partner, but as far as this simple search told me, Goldberg does not identify publicly as a lesbian or bisexual or talk about her partner anywhere besides the one interview where she mentions her. I called Chelsea, and before I knew it, I was railing on about how can even Natalie Goldberg, who lives, I might add, in our queer little Santa Fe, be closeted. I've since read her other books, and she does write about her women partners quite openly. I also met Natalie, Nat, and learned that reading The Ballad of the Sad Cafe in 9th grade changed her life. She always thought it was because Amelia was such a strong woman character. But when she found out that Carson was queer, she realized it went much deeper than that. Preaching. So it isn't about, is Carson a lesbian, or Carson is a lesbian, or what is a lesbian? What I want to know is, how have lesbians gotten by and had relationships and found love and community? What does that look like? One answer, we don't really know. If we, writers, historians, biographers, can just start acknowledging the lesbian parts of ourselves and others, maybe we can start to know what it is to love women. But please, no more demands for certain kinds of proof. No more doesn't count unless bullshit. Don't tell me there's just not enough evidence. Let's call a lesbian a lesbian. Call yourself a lesbian if you've ever loved women. Loved another woman, period. You loved your mother? Lesbian. It's all well and good for me to say this now, but what have I been doing all along if not looking for proof? When I found what I was looking for, I had no clue what to do with it, what it meant. Queer histories often take the form of lists, of calling out and naming kindred spirits. This practice has largely gone out of vogue as labeling a person's gender or sexual identity, past or present, is fraught with complexities. What did that person call themselves, and what did it mean at the time? Is it best to call a person queer or to specify? Is labeling always an essentializing force? As Maggie Nelson insists, the best way to find out how people feel about their gender or their sexuality or anything else really is to listen to what they tell you and try to treat them accordingly without shellacking over their version of reality with yours. Perhaps in calling Carson queer, calling her a lesbian, I am shellacking, setting her on my own terms despite my desire to give her space in her own words. By including her words, I make them my own. But there's a part of me, a defiant and somewhat juvenile part, that still wants the list. It's not all that important to me to define what it is to be a lesbian, constant shifting, the ever new. But I can't help but want to know who else is at the table with me, who I can call kin. And then the next chapter is a list of Carson's possible girlfriends. Thank you so much. Really appreciated the chance to be here.
Thank you, Jen. I love that section that you read. I love that entire book. It's really wonderful. All right. Our next reader tonight will be Megan Fernandez. Megan Fernandez's second book of poetry, Good Boys, looks like this, just came out with Tin House this past February. And preparing to introduce her tonight, I was revisiting praise for the collection, and something that struck me is how much it focuses on action, on the types of moving through the world that this work inspires. Says Brenda Shaughnessy, "The poetry of Megan Fernandez gives me courage to get up another day and fight the patriarchy and racist nationalism." Says Kaveh Akbar, "If there is no ethical consumption under late capitalism, our job is to figure out how to move through this world while causing it the least harm. What can a poet do for people, for a planet literally dying of human greed?" One way in which I think the collection invites these responses is by articulating how difficult it can be to face what's hard, to actually look at it directly. The characters that populate these poems, as well as the speaker herself, know there are ways to look away, ways to hide. See the poem nukemap.com, for example, in which the speaker is contemplating nuclear destruction while watching her laptop. "You can live in the television," she says, "where nothing will incinerate you." To see a poet then who chooses to do precisely the opposite, to not hide, to live and fight and engage through a collection like this is a brave and startling thing. Megan's first book of poems, The Kingdom and After, came out in 2015, and her poetry has appeared in The New Yorker, Tin House, and Plowshares, among many other publications. There's a really incredible interview she just did in Adroit, which I would encourage everyone to go read. She is currently an assistant professor of English at Lafayette College and teaches courses on poetry, creative nonfiction, and critical theory. I am delighted that she's here with us reading tonight. Megan, welcome.
Thank you. That was a beautiful introduction and readings to follow. So I'm going to read 5 poems. I feel like it's good to know how many poems you have to sit through. I love poetry, and even I need to know kind of when it's over. And I'm going to read this poem that was published recently in the Los Angeles Review of Books, and it's called "Do You Sell Dignity Here?" "Do you know what aisle they sell dignity?" I say to the store clerk on University Avenue. It is a cold October. Frank Ocean's Moon River croons in my head, and earlier that day I lay flat in the bathtub like a wild infant, shower pouring, thinking of that Dickinson poem where she says, "A bomb upon the ceiling is an improving thing, steam gathering in celestial curls, and I imagine bombs fizzing out gas and me, radioactive with love." At the grocery store, I ask where they sell dignity, and when the clerk says, "Sorry, what did you say?" I explain that I am looking for dignity, having lost so much in the last year, and was wondering if it was neatly placed by the baking powder or perhaps refrigerated with the perishables given its fragile shelf life. And yes, I really did ask this, partly because I was being funny and trying to make a friend, but also I would have taken a hug or any acknowledgement that I am a person who can laugh at myself despite walking with that odd angle of defeat. Children have no dignity, and I really admire that about them. I love their ruthless response to injustices, their desire to feed birds in the park, to grieve the sea, their right to be tired in public. "Do you sell dignity here?" I ask one last time, and then tell him how it went down, how I had lost mine in Bushwick of all places, near a building covered in glass, and white girl gentrifiers having their white girl epiphanies, such bad coming of age trash. Jesus, all my parents' sacrifices for this. For what? Is this why I came here? From Africa, they would say, over my flat body, hopefully in the shape of a shrug. I am undignified. I prey on fluorescent light. I enter through the automatic door of grocery stores with royal glide, feetless, into an even white. I greet peaches and body, cauliflower, nod to the pink packets of sweeteners and wrapped meat thighs. I am drawn to the milks and oblong fruit, Denta Red Campbell can of soup. I want everything as cheap and damaged as this feeling. When they go low, we go high, a president's wife said. I go low some days. I go so low you cannot tell me from the animals we sell, from the hard grain my body has become. they're all bummers. So the second poem I'm gonna read is it's about a friend of mine when I was living in Paris. His name is Malik, and it's called, or maybe I'll read this other one first. Yeah, actually, maybe I'm going to read this other poem first, and then I'll read that one afterwards. So this one is called Amsterdam, and it is about Amsterdam. Sometimes the mythologies of a city are true, like when I see a blonde man bob for red apples selling records side by side with a black cat wound in a cushion deep in dream. Josh says he doesn't want to go see Anne Frank, that kind of tourism depresses him, the one where the demonstration of grief is like a voyeuristic tug at suffering that is not yours to possess. How do you eat a meal after that? He seems sad today. How do you stay alive? When he was young, he visited Auschwitz and told me not to go because it had a gift shop, and that made him angry. And nobody knows how to grieve in public, how to make public space for loss unless you can make money off of it. But really, there is something else to his anger. The child abandoned, the residue of a young girl's life turned into a petting zoo. This he cannot take. I've become like my mother, where I don't sleep in a new city anymore. Immune to time shifts, I just wander and buy fruit and almonds and a good loaf of bread, and today some fresh juice, skipping museums, though I want to go back and see Anne Frank's house this time, because this time I am a woman, and last time I was a girl, and when you are a girl, all you see is another girl, and when you are a woman, all you see is history careening towards a girl whom you cannot protect. I'm thinking of Harlem and Amsterdam. Sometimes I go there to hide. I go there to eat at a bistro owned by a lady named Faye. In Harlem, there is Faye, and she is older with light eyes, and her whole family owns this place, and her grandson works behind the bar, and he's just 17 and a soccer player, and this week got into Dartmouth. And I ask if she thinks he'll be happy being a black kid at Dartmouth, but Faye is Queen Faye and knows better than to answer questions about race at dinner time, especially in front of all these nice people. In Amsterdam, the cold sunlight of April grows the dandelions in the gutter, and when you get to 263 to see Anne Frank's house, only from the outside, the building is not as tall as you remember, and you wonder what the ceilings were like for a young girl, and you imagine her face. I imagine her face and think maybe something bad happened to Josh when he was a kid, and you see her face in the window, her face lit up in story, her face in love and in fear, and you are in Amsterdam when the American president bombed Syria. You say American president as if you are not an American, and as if he is not your president. You promised that he would not make his way into any poem, but here he is bombing Syria, and here he is in your poem, and here's her face spreading all over Europe, and here is your face, Anne, spreading all over Europe, and here is your face, your face, your face. So like I said, they are all kind of depressing. I'm trying to think if there's like a fun one. There's not. This one's kind of fun. Okay, so this is the one I was telling you. This is about my friend Malik. Thanks, Anthony. Malik is a person I met, again, as I was saying, in Paris, and just like a lovely, sweet soul. And the poem is called Why We Drink. I tell Malik I'm going to stop. I tell him that I do it because I am sad and because someone was mean to me at a lecture after 5 men spoke during the Q&A. So I finally said something about energy and petrocultures, and didn't the infrastructure of the moon landing just look like the oil fields of Alberta? And some older Italian men said no, said I was projecting, as if projection were not interpretation, but it was in front of a lot of people. And what was the point of all my degrees and giving up a decade of life to school if I could be so easily humiliated? And maybe I shouldn't have worn jeans shredded at my thighs, or that navy sweater, sleeves blooming with moth holes. But if these are our left institutions, if these are the men on our side, I said, then of course I'm going to drink. Malik says you can't quit before 35 because you're not going to stay quit. And something about me trusts him because he was at the ear end back when it was the ear end back on the old New York, and he tells me I'm the new New York, and I don't even know how to tell him that I'm not even that. I say humiliation is like the nausea of childhood with those delayed epiphanies. I hate the violence of insight, the lesson how somebody is always ugly or dishonest, the shortcoming that could build a civilization and then did. Malik is not even so much older, 40-something. But there have been many Maliks, and therefore he claims ancientness. He says it's all real. My parents and those men, and yes, even the feeble species. He keeps a notebook and writes down all the great Irish bits spiraling out of Helen's mouth at dinner. He sits cross-legged on a pillow, cradles lemon and snacks on pickle, waxes poetic while he assesses the spice level of a green Peruvian sauce I make, which he ranks only 3 for spice, but insists it's a 10 in taste because he knows I am fragile. He does impressions of nutritionists and people who get jazzed about gym memberships. But I know that we are both laughing that he is really sad. Sad that this is the theater of his multitasking, that the corruptions are multiplying faster than our jokes, so we have become creatures who can slip through dimensions, our times thick with simultaneity, so ready we are to be brutalized many times a day, even with laughter. Malik says maybe it's time to leave New York. He can tell we're all getting tilted there, and by that he means becoming products paralyzed by false moonlight in the streets. I tell Malik I drink because I am tired and because they hate us anyway, and we are outside while others smoke at the opening of the Red Wheelbarrow in Paris, and I wear a polka dot dress, and I forgot to put on a bra this morning, and it is freezing, and I see myself. The mess of my complaints and temperatures, the way I'm not making any sense these days. He says yes and yes and yes. He keeps saying it's all okay, all real. Tells me to turn my insights into continents, into paintings, get sloppy, delicate, be a feral amateur. When I get back to New York, he's the only one I still talk to on the regular. He says, listen to this and read this, and his brain is so addicted to joy, and we both get nominated for a prize in the same week, and it works. It really does work. The way his spirit skims octaves across the ocean into my heart, into this poem. The way he said my Jesus year, now that I'm 33, is going to reveal something about me, which it just did, and do you know, this time the revelation didn't hurt so much, which is what Malik might call aging, a process not nearly as dire as they want you to believe. Okay, 2 more poems. This is a poem called Conversion, and I was hanging out with Sam Sachs, another poet, a great poet, and he was like, yo, what's your book called? And I was like, it's called Good Boys. And he's like, oh, like a dog? And I was like, no, not like a dog. And so I wrote this poem after that because I didn't want anyone to think that it had anything to do with that. But maybe it does. I don't know. So, Conversion. Sam says you can't name your dog Good Boys without Conversion. Sam says you can't name your book Good Boys without a dog. But Sam doesn't know that I am the dog. I am the ultimate mutt, and I'm telling him this story at a bar called College Hill Tavern that looks like a front for some operation where all the bar stools appear as if they were staged in under 10 minutes. And the girl with the fake lashes knows I like a double gin. And I'm telling Sam that I was a dog who was converted when I was 17, and my mother found an essay about how I was in love with the girl, and there was a Portishead reference in case you need me to date it. And this was way before the liberation of the young and the white twins on YouTube who come out to their dad and everybody cries and transforms. When I see those kids, all I think is they never had parents who were immigrants and who sent you to a lady and told you to solve it all in one session because this therapy was expensive. It wasn't traumatic. It was funny. And I remember the couch. There were multiple couches and I had to choose a spot, and I sat on the couch farthest from her. And this wasn't the first nice lady who looked at me like I was a dog. And Sam, when I said it's called Good Boys, what I meant is that I was a good boy and loved good boys and good men and still love them. But you see, I was 17 and alone, and nobody gave me anything except one book by Dickinson. And she was so neat, so precise, so human. And I wasn't. I just wasn't. I was just a dog. I wasn't even that good. And I'm going to end with a very short poem. And it's after Bonnie Capil, Vertical Interrogation of Strangers. If you haven't, I see you got a lot of Portishead fans. It's called What Will You Miss About the Earth? And it's 4 lines. What will you miss about the earth? That it's spun. That everything was a portrait of gravity, the smell of a new body, newly close, ready to love. Thank you very much.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Megan. All right. Our last reader tonight is Jeannie Vanasco. I I read Jeannie Vanasco's memoir, The Glass Eye, on a plane several years ago, and I remember being so shaken in ways that were hard to articulate. The more I engage with her work, the more I understand that there are many ways I could praise it. But I think most of all, when I think of Jeannie's writing, I think of precision. She has MFAs in both poetry and memoir, and you can absolutely see a poet's attention to language, even in her prose. Writers attending the Tin House workshop who will have access to her craft talk later this week, I've seen a bit of it, you are in for a huge treat. It's astounding. And what this attention to language does is open her work up to examine and articulate really difficult, critically important subject matter. Her most recent book, this is the hardcover, Things We Didn't Talk About When I Was a Girl, does just that. After 14 years without contact, Jeannie interviews the man, a former friend who raped her. The book is a record of these interviews, layering her emails, phone calls, and in-person dialogue with him between her own reflections, research, and conversations with her friends, partner, and others. Tin House is publishing the book in paperback this coming fall, and the hardest thing about preparing the paperback was cutting down the resounding amount of praise the hardcover received. I've read many wonderful reviews and blurbs, and there's one line I always return to, and it's from Sofia Shalmiev in her statement that this book is a literary feminist miracle. I think Sophia's right. It's a book about language, why it matters, the power it holds. It's a book about community, how it can empower us and help us to process. There's also a really incredible conversation between Jeannie and Sophia in Epiphany Journal, which I would encourage everyone to read. Other writing of Jeannie's has appeared in The Believer, The New York Times, many other places. She lives in Baltimore and is an assistant professor of English at Towson University, and I am so honored to have her here reading tonight. Jeannie, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Elizabeth. That was amazing. And I just want to thank Lance and India and everybody at Tin House for organizing this community of writers, and for, I want to thank the other readers tonight and the interpreters and all of you in the audience. And I'm going to dedicate my reading tonight to my Tin House workshop students who are so amazing. I feel really lucky to be working with you. You're just so insightful and generous and kind and also very funny. So, all right, so you don't really need to know too much beyond actually what Elizabeth told you. She prefaced the book perfectly. So I'm just gonna read from the very beginning. Early evening. We were in your car at the end of your block at a stop sign. The streets were empty. My window was open because I hated closed windows, probably because I thought my "why drive if you can't feel the wind" attitude made me profound. We were 16. I just needed to leave my house, you said. With a few classmates, we'd been cramming for an exam about waves and optics and contemplating why our accomplished physics teacher taught at our poorly ranked public high school. Cost of living, witness protection, he actually likes Sandusky. When we left, our classmates were writing formulas on their wrists with fine point markers. Let's drive until we hit civilization, I said. You stared straight ahead at something, it seemed, that couldn't be seen. Somewhere with a bookstore, I said, like a real bookstore, one with a poetry section that's more than one shelf. You squeezed the steering wheel and suddenly your pale knuckles looked cartoonish, like a badly rendered, unshaded drawing of knuckles. I barely glanced at your face. I sensed you were resisting tears. You told me I was important to you. I told you I knew that. And you said, no, really, you're the only one who understands me. You turned, looked at me, then quickly looked away. I had never seen you cry before. I hadn't seen many teenage boys cry, but I didn't say that. I know you understand this, you said. I just get so lonely. This is probably my favorite memory of us. I know you're sad now, I said, but I promise this will be a happy memory someday, us at this perfectly straight stop sign. You nodded, and I wonder if I explained my observation, or if my observation was insightful enough to imply its metaphoric meaning, as in, let's notice when things are right. The memory stops there. If you were critiquing this, you might say, come on, Jeannie, it's a little too perfect, don't you think? The memory stopping at a stop sign. There are gaps. I already predict failure. I'm afraid he'll say no, or even worse, ignore me. But why wouldn't he agree to speak with me? He owes me that much. I could disguise his identity, change his name. Combing a naming dictionary for some rough translation of friend, I first land on Aldwin, old friend. I picture a knight, an 11th century Norman invader, a sorcerer in a fantasy novel, a president of a Martha's Vineyard men's club, a child of artfully tattooed parents. Between 1880 and 2016, the Social Security Administration recorded only 129 babies named Aldwin. My former friend's pseudonym should be common, modern, unassuming. I want readers to know someone with the same name. Phil means friend, but he's not the Phil type. Phil orders everybody drinks. Phil shakes your hand, says, call me Phil. Phil's too casual, too laid back. My former friend may have slacked from one day into the next, but he wavered between anxious and depressed. Philip then? Philip contains friend of horses. But I doubt he ever touched a horse. He preferred the indoors, rarely straying from couch, desk, and bed. His white skin burned easily. Forget name origins. What about the origins of words that are also names, like Nick? Some of Nick's obsolete meanings, reckoning or account, slang for the vagina. But I dated a Nick in college briefly between boyfriends. I'd prefer that memories of Nick, him telling me, I could tell you weren't very cultured when I met you. And how have you not heard of Broken Social Scene? And I don't understand why you won't sleep with me if you like me, not influence this project. Though I like the sound of Nick. So I want a monosyllabic word that works as a name and contains a K. Mark, maybe? Its main definition, a boundary, and that's what this is about, boundaries. Perfect. Mark then. Why should I protect Mark? I enter his work address in Google Street View. Instead of his pale yellow office building on an industrial one-way street, I aim my view at the clouds and telephone wires. The wires don't line up precisely. There are gaps of just sky, gaps between communication. I should stop searching for metaphors. Mark and I stopped speaking to one another in college. He was in Ohio studying engineering. I was in Illinois majoring in journalism. He dropped out shortly after we last spoke, which is not to say I'm the reason or that what happened between us is the reason, but I hope it's the reason, or rather what he did to me during winter break of our sophomore year is, I hope, the reason. I can't forget, I was passed out. Mark now manages a camera shop. I recently found an online forum where he answers questions about cameras. Someone asked if a blur in a photo can be good, and Mark replied, if the intent is to give an abstract rendering for some artistic reason, then it's acceptable. When no such intent exists, it's merely bad technique that has caused something that should be sharp to blur. If he could photograph that night, would he blur it? Where would he blur it? My memory is blurry, there are gaps. But I know what he did, and he does too. The next day, or maybe a few days later, he apologized. I should not have done that to you. I am so sorry. It was not okay. Can you ever forgive me? I said I could. I said I would. I told him to read J.D. Salinger's Franny and Zoe, my favorite novel back then. I cringe at the memory. He read it and told me it reminded him of us. But no one in the book carries his drunk friend into a basement, takes off her clothes while she's passed out, fingers her, masturbates over her while she cries, and tells her, it's just a dream. I'm so glad you liked the book, is what I said. A year later, Mark dropped out of college. He moved back home, tried therapy, became a mechanic. At least this is what his dad told my mom. By then, our friendship had ended, though I doubt his parents and siblings knew why. Friends grow apart is probably what they thought. As with many things after my dad died, I never told my mom. Mark, according to LinkedIn, returned to college, earned a bachelor's in interdisciplinary studies, and several years later, a master's in civil engineering. When we were friends, I told him, someday you'll become a famous engineer. You'll discover a formula so complicated that high school students will write it on their wrists before exams. Every time I think about him, I feel pissed off and sad. I understand now why nostalgia, for hundreds of years, was considered a chronic mental illness. I want to hate him, but I can't. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeannie. That was really amazing. And thank you again to everyone who's read tonight, Jeannie, Megan, Jen, Jonathan, for sharing your incredible work with us. And thank you one more time to our wonderful ASL interpreters this evening too, Rory and Mac. Thank you to everyone who tuned in for the reading, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.